Good morning. Welcome to week 4 of the Curriculum Design Fellowship. Very happy to see you all this morning and excited to talk about curriculum design and Canvas, learning, teaching, maybe even a little hockey. I wanted to share with you all that the video for last week's session has been uploaded. I apologize for the delay. We tried to do something a little bit different last week, and it turns out YouTube still does not want to work with me in any way, shape, or form. So it sat processing for about a day and a half at 99%. One of the reasons that it takes a little bit longer is because, well, we try those things, but the other portion of it is that we want to make sure that we post it with captions. That leads into one thing that I was going to share with you all. Last week, we had a meeting for a group of folks that are on this particular discussion, along with Susan Bees and IT, to go through live captioning of Zoom. We have a software that we are investigating right now. I should be sending out an email later this week for faculty members that want to get that plugin. We are not entering into a long-term contract for that, partially because Zoom itself is supposed to launch its own technology next month to do live captioning, and we'd like to test that out to see if that's something that we want to do. It should be part of our site license, but with all things technological, as you can tell, we want to make sure that they hit their target date to get that out, and that it works as well, if not better, than the technology that we're currently looking at. With that, I am going to turn it to Sharon real quick to go over SpeedGrader within discussions, and then I figured we'd open it up for technological questions regarding Canvas, and then we'd move on to D.
Okay, so had a lot of questions about how to use SpeedGrader, and specifically SpeedGrader with discussions or how to manage discussions. And so I'm in our gradebook. So you'll recognize your names here, but don't anybody be embarrassed, because this I feel bad doing this, because there are a few of you who haven't submitted this assignment, but it's okay. It's okay. So what you would do is you would go in. So I'm going to go back out to the front of the course so you can see it from there. So from the front of the course, you would click on grades in your navigation area. And remember, you can move grades to wherever you want it, and you can make it invisible if you want it, but it'll be visible to you as the instructor. But it's, it's nice to be able to position it wherever you want it in that list of navigation items. But you'd click on grades. And let me make sure I'm showing the right screen. So you're now seeing the grade book, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And from here, these little dots take you to the SpeedGrader. Okay, so I'm going to click the dot, and I'm going to go down to SpeedGrader. By the way, you'll notice I also have a message students who. If you've got people who haven't submitted something, you could send it just to those students. And that's a neat way that, Canvas lets you target just the people who need the message. But for now, I'm just going to go and show you the SpeedGrader. So click on SpeedGrader. It will pop to one of the items that needs grading. So Billy is up here. You'll notice that she's got her introduction and she's got one response. We're hoping for people to do 2 responses. So I wrote a comment down here. Welcome, Billy. Be sure to reply to 1 more to get full credit. And then once she's gotten that, I would just put her grade here and it would automatically update it. I can then jump to anyone else. Notice the ones with the red or orange dot. Those are the ones that I still have to grade, that are still missing something. So like if I went to Carla's, I would see that she has replied to 2, but she hasn't actually introduced herself. So that's what's missing on hers. I'll look at Renee's, and you'll notice that she did her introduction and 2 replies. So she has her 5 points there. But it's very easy. I can go and see who hasn't submitted at all. So Pilar's in there and she hasn't submitted yet. But it's very, very easy to jump right to an individual student and see what they have done or what they haven't done. This is also the way that you can see an individual student's post. The discussion forums are extremely difficult to reply to as an instructor. For me, at least, I was finding it very difficult. I can see everything, but like, let's say, you know, here, Carrie Olson has asked, Manning has asked a question about, I'm teaching a large group, it'd be challenging, and, you know, I'm interested in knowing more what ideas you come up with. Maybe I want to reply just to that. The only way I can do that is to click, I can click into the forum, but now I see everybody's replies. So I have to do Control F to look for just part of hers. So I could do Control F and type in Carrie, and now I see 13 posts with her, and so I can run right to her post. Okay, but that is cumbersome. That's not, that should be easier, but it's not. When I'm done with a particular assignment that I'm grading, I can go back to the gradebook by clicking this gradebook icon up here. And now I see the entire gradebook again. If I want to go to the course, I can click right there to go to the front page of the course again. And then that will bring my course up and my navigation bar. Okay. So any questions? Does anybody have any questions about Canvas, about the interface, about grading things? I see some chat things down there. I don't know. Yeah, no, I asked ahead of time, Michael. I asked, am I in any kind of hot water by showing people's? And I was told it's okay. We're not FERPA here. But
Sharon,
let's see.
oh,
Yes.
this is Angie Olson. I know you commented on one of my discussion boards that you had an interface with our homework platforms. Is that something that I can just work with you on, or how does that work? Or is there direction somewhere I can go to?
Tell me again, I'm sorry, what was your question?
With interfacing with the homework platforms for grades. So, you know, like I use Wiley Plus, and Wiley Plus is set up with a very Canvas-like looking feature. So I'm assuming it'll interface for grades. Is that something I can work with you on the side on, or?
Yep, you work with me on the side. You let me know what the publisher is, and if you can reach out to the publisher, that's good too. And then just tell them to contact me. And then we set up the LTI, and usually they have accompanying work or accompanying message that goes to the instructor on how to use it after it's set up on the back end. But we've set up Pearson, Cengage, Macmillan, McGraw-Hill, you know, Oxford University. So any of those that you are using, let me know and we'll set them up.
Okay, great, thank you.
Pilar asked, will live captioning work in foreign languages? I do not know the answer to that. Does somebody know the answer to that one? We want to add that to our captioning discussion.
I am checking with Dan, and I'm gonna see if we can't test it out next week to see what the capabilities are on foreign language.
Right. Any other questions on Canvas interface? No. One thing I will tell you, I want to quickly bring this to this group's attention. And I think I sent it to everyone that I knew about, but I might not know about everybody. If you have a course that you're going to teach in Canvas that is cross-listed or multiple sections, you can actually set that up as what we're calling a super course, but I will send you the instructions. So if you need those instructions, email me and I will send them to you so that you can set up your own super course. And it's important to set it up before students start working in either one of them. Once students start working in either one, then they're going to lose work in one or the other if you combine the two sections. So we need to do it before your class starts.
Excellent, thank you, Sharon.
Okay, one more quick thing. If you decide you want to use Moodle after taking this Canvas, that is perfectly fine. I've had a number of people decide that there's just so much on everyone's plates, they want to stay with Moodle. We did get a security upgrade installed on yesterday morning, which changed the interface. Those of you who've been in Moodle have been shocked by that, I'm sure. It's like, it looks much different. They have fixed it somewhat, but the way we used to access our courses is no longer supported. So I will be sending out a Moodle housekeeping message, and I'll be including some information on how to find your courses because it's not as easy as it used to be. Let's see. Oh, question here from Michael. Can you say something about turning Sandbox into the real course? Yes. Once you've got your Sandbox course, like COSC 130s ready to go in a Sandbox, then you can go and import that into your actual COSC 130. You just click in settings and on the right-hand side, import, and you choose copy course from Canvas or copy Canvas course. And so it's very easy. If you'd like me to walk you through it or like steps, I can sure send them out. But it's extremely easy to import your Sandbox into your real course. All right, I think I really am done now.
Okay. It's always hard to tell over Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to read one small excerpt from Dee's book really quickly, and it'll help kind of highlight what we were talking about late last week and just now. When designing a new course or redesigning an old one, the first step needs to be careful review of situational factors that may affect the three key decisions. If you skip over the step or do a superficial job, you increase the chances of ending up with a course that doesn't work for the students involved, doesn't meet the needs of the curriculum, doesn't fit the teacher, or otherwise misses the mark. Hence, it is important to take the necessary time to carefully review a number of potentially important factors and determine which of them need to be kept in mind during the rest of the design process. So I thought about that after sending the email last week regarding completion of the CDF. As I stated in the email, the intention is to make sure that you all are feeling supported and that you have resources in order to develop for fall. But if the dog ate your homework or you're feeling behind, we want to make sure that you're able to prioritize what you need to do. Again, I'm not going to do a strong audit of everybody's work and spell check and all of those sorts of things. The intention is really to support you. So to what Sharon was saying earlier, if you go through growing with Canvas and you feel like you don't necessarily want to jump all the way in right now, that's perfectly fine. I've had a number of folks in the June cohort say the same thing to me. And I've said, yes, if you're a heavy discussion user or there's a portion of the grade book that still feels slightly opaque, yes, maybe it is time to look at that during the J term or in the spring. So don't feel compelled to move any quicker than you're ready. And really the intention is to make sure that you're ready for the first day of classes. So as we continue through Dee's work, and as we continue to examine Canvas and HighFlex, again, please bring those questions that are going to be helpful both to you and your colleagues, but know that the intention is that if you're all done next week on the 18th, fantastic. If you're done on November 18th, fantastic. That's just fine. I understand that you've got multiple plates spinning, and the intent, like I said, is really to support you throughout this process. Dee, I will start assigning groups, and the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you. As I was sitting here listening to all this taking place, getting started on this today's session, it's reminding me what I suspect all of you are fairly aware of. But for those of you who are either have recently taught online or getting ready to teach for the first time or one of the first times online, this webinar is a great opportunity to experience what it feels like to be on the receiving end of a course taught online. And I had to learn a lot of that myself the first time I started doing this. But the things like having a very clear navigation system through the website for the course, and for the teacher finding ways to be supportive and to find ways to enable the students to interact with each other. Really important things to help make for a high quality online course. So you're having a chance to see that and feel it and start thinking about how you want to provide for these things in your own courses when you get going with that. But with that said, let me go ahead and get started with today's topic. Let me go ahead and bring up the the PowerPoint because it, see if I can get this going here. Oh, Jake, can I get screen sharing here for me?
Okay, try and see
Or
if
somebody, anybody who can,
Yep,
I get it. I'm getting disabled here.
All right. Thought that I just fixed that.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
What am I? Right here, probably. Okay, let me get this out and get that out and get this up. Here we go.
Now, we're still just seeing the Zoom window.
Oh, you are?
Mm-hmm.
Your screen sharing is paused. Is there something I should, I'm getting that message at the top.
Okay. I'm going to stop your sharing and then let you try again.
Yeah, let me stop share and then let you come back in here. You just learned a good lesson. When you're going to do something, check it out before the time starts. Well, I can go ahead and get started here. I'd like to get that screen because one of the things you try it now.
Oh, yes, yes. No, I stopped it and now you should try again and see if it will work.
Okay, there we go. That's looking good. Okay, now you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, okay. What we did last week was talk about our big dream and the culminating project. What we're doing now this week is going to the next big step in this, and that is building the 3-column table. And as part of that, what we're going to do today is 2 parts of that. One is writing good learning goals, and then once you get that done, then identifying the assessment activities and learning activities that are tied to those learning goals. But here's the diagram. That's the reason I wanted to share, wait till we got this. I wanted to sort of see the diagram, how that works. The part in yellow is what we did last week. What we're going to do this week is start with learning outcomes for a few minutes and then take that into the 3-column table there. So let's talk a little bit about writing good learning goals. We briefly mentioned that last week. You've all heard of the famous Bloom taxonomy. Very, very powerful, very good. I came up with a new taxonomy built from interviews with students rather than interviews with professors. And like Bloom has 6 categories, but they're different. 3 of them are very similar to Bloom. The other 3 are not, like so. And somebody pushed me early after I had started sharing this out to draw a diagram that kind of showed the interaction of these 6 kinds of learning, and that's what led me to this little. Now, I see this in Minute to be kind of like an electron, where the energy in each one of those circles affect the energy in the others. My wife looked at this and saw a sunflower where everything's connected. That's okay. Either way is okay. And here's the pie chart version of that. And you've probably read enough in that book to be familiar with this, so I won't go all the way around it. Other than to say the 3 items, the 3 categories on what I call the right-hand side of this diagram are really identical to Bloom. They're just repackaged, but they're the same kinds of things, from the foundational knowledge, which is kind of his knowledge and understanding, to the application, which actually has several categories building into it, and then the integration with this, like his synthesis. But the 3 items on the left-hand side is what goes beyond Bloom, and what attracts a lot of people, a lot of teachers, to this taxonomy, but also challenges them, because this to actually build this kind of learning intentionally into the course is something they haven't done before. So it takes some thinking to figure out what the learning activities might be, but also especially the assessment activity. So let's practice a little bit with this, just to see if you can look at an example of a learning outcome and link it to one of the categories in that taxonomy. So here's one of them. If you wanted students to demonstrate increased confidence in using integrated course design to redesign their courses. If that was a kind of a learning goal you had for your course. Question, and I'm going to need some help here from Jay and Sharon and Lisa and whoever to look for some hands, but talk a hand up or just speak out. What category do you see that learning goal as being linked to? Anybody? Just speak up. Unmute yourself and then speak up.
Learning to learn.
Learning how to learn, that would help. I would probably, what are some other possibilities?
I think it goes with a lot of them because competence requires you to have the foundational knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And that also relates to caring, for that matter.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're demonstrating awareness of is how much these are all linked. And the more you work with that taxonomy, the more you really realize how linked they are. I would go for one more. My own thought about this one is the confidence is something a person has about themselves. They have gained a confidence in themselves that they can do this. So I would probably link that to the human dimension self portion of that human dimension. But as you say, these are linked to others, but that's where I would put that one. Let's see. No, okay, let's take this one. You want people to be able to identify the 6 parts of the taxonomy. What category would you put that in?
Application.
Application, doing it. What other possibilities?
Learning how to learn.
What's that?
Learning how to learn.
Learning how to learn. Okay. Another possibilities?
Foundational knowledge.
That's where I would probably put it, foundational knowledge. Just do you know the 6 parts and can be able to name them and maybe describe them? Yeah, that's just a foundational, for me, foundational knowledge. Again, linked to a lot of the others. We'll take 2 more here. Find increased value in the importance of course design in higher education. Anybody?
Caring.
Caring, yeah, that's probably, yeah, whenever you see something like find value in or get interested in, more interested in, that's what I'm thinking of when I had that category of caring. Let's try one more and then we'll do something else here. Use some of the information learned in the course when applying it to case studies.
The application.
Yep, that's pretty easy. Yeah, if you see the word use or apply, either one, that's what we're talking about, application. Taking the information learned and doing something with it, in this case, applying it to case study. So good job. So you're getting the idea of what different examples of learning goals in these categories might look like and what you might want to get from them. Okay, now let's take another, can you rate the quality of a learning goal? Now you can write a learning goal and they can be high, medium, or low in terms of quality. There's good things or bad things to do about these, you know, a well-stated learning goal. So I'm going to show you 3 of them and then we'll just see if you see these high, medium, or low. One is just to learn the basic theories of social psychology. Somebody would say, I want my students to do that. Describe multiple factors. This is like for a history course, with supporting evidence that explain major historical events. For example, in a US history course, what prompted the North and South to do the Civil War. And then third, for a language course, communicate in Spanish with grammatically correct sentences. Okay, let's just take these first. Number 1, somebody's going to help me out here, but take the first one, learn the basic theories of social psychology. Let's see, maybe just do a voice thing. Everybody unmute yourself and we'll see how the volume here. How many people would see that as a high quality learning statement of a learning goal? Just shout it out.
No.
Okay, medium? Now, okay, and I'll show my hand a little bit. One of these I meant to be poor, 1 medium, and 1 high quality. Low quality?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Low.
Yeah. You got that one the way I saw it anyway. Yeah, it's too opaque, too general. Learn, what do we mean by learn? We probably want students to do something more than just know what the basic theories are. We probably want them to do something with them, to analyze situations, whatever. So not a well-stated one. let's take number 2, describe multiple factors, so forth, so forth. How many see that one as a high quality learning goal statement?
Yes.
Yes.
Number 2, yes.
Some yeses. Some people see it as a medium.
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 Okay.
Medium.
Okay. Let's hold on that one. Go. Well, for those who saw it as a high quality, what did you see in it that made you think this is a pretty good way of stating a learning goal?
The fact they have to have supporting evidence.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Others?
I felt like the multiple factors, I felt like there's too much packed into this. That's why I made it medium
There's
and
a
not
lot packed into it, yeah. For those who saw it as medium, maybe some good things, but maybe some not so good things. What was it that concerned you about this one?
too much in it.
I'd
There
agree.
is a lot in it, yeah. Mhm.
It's really
I'd
specific.
discuss.
Okay, let's hold that one and come down to the third one. You want students to communicate in Spanish with grammatically correct sentences. How many see this as high? A high quality statement.
I thought it was high.
High.
Okay. Some, medium?
Medium.
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 Okay, some both here. Okay, and I've given away the fact that I don't see it as a low when I see the first one is worse than this third one. Okay, let me tell you my read on these two. I think the third one, I put the third one as a medium. The communicate is good, partially because, you know, in most language courses, we want students to communicate in more than one way. We want them maybe to be able to read it depending on the language, but probably with Spanish, we want them to be able to communicate orally. They want to hear Spanish and understand it and speak Spanish and to where it is understandable. We might want to spell that out a little more. Grammatically correct sentences for most, at least introductory Spanish courses, I think that's focusing too much on one subpart, where there are bigger things you want students to be able to focus on. Just communicate, even if you make a few mistakes, find ways to communicate what you want to say and find ways to understand other people. So I saw that as the medium. The second one is the one I tried to write in a way that I thought was good. There are a lot of parts in that, although half of it's in the parentheses there. It has one verb, but I think this is actually what a lot of history professors really want their students to do. That is, after studying a historical period or an area or whatever, they want them to be able to look at an event and say, can you see, one of the things they want them to do is, can you identify the multiple factors that led up to that event? Again, with supporting evidence, that's one of the criteria. Presumably, one of the other things they want them to do is identify the implications of an event. That is, what effect did that event have on things thereafter? But this seemed, I mean, if I'm a student in that course like that, this is, I'm okay, they're going to give me an event. They're going to want me to write an essay in which I describe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever factors with supporting evidence. I've got to learn what constitutes good evidence and how that linked to an explanatory power, et cetera. I really think that's what a lot of history professors do want them to do. And if I were a student, this would help me understand what they want me to do. So that's just a general thing of some of the factors you want to think about when you start writing your learning goals. Now we've got a handout that I forget whether I've sent to Jay or not, but if not, we'll get it out there for your factors. It turns out a faculty developer at the Air Force Academy wrote up a really good handout just for writing good learning goals. And I thought he did a fabulous job of it. That whole institution was going to a learning-centered curriculum, so the professors had to know how to write good learning goals. So he put together this little guide for them. So I'm going to make sure you have that available. And one of the things I like about it, I think he has like 7 or 8 things to try to do. But for each one, he gives an example of a poorly written learning goal that's bad for that factor, and that same learning goal written in a better way, incorporating that principle. So we'll give you some help on writing high quality learning goals. Okay, now we asked some of you to take a first crack between last week and this week in writing some learning goals for your own courses.
Maybe
I'm assuming that it was a little easier to write learning goals on the right-hand side of that taxonomy. That is the things that are like Bloom, and because we're somewhat familiar with trying to promote that kind of learning. But I want to give us a chance to talk a little bit about some of the learning goals on the left-hand side that you might have had difficulty writing. So I'm just going to ask for a couple of volunteers here. Would somebody share out with us an effort that you made to write a learning goal for one of the categories on the left-hand side that you had difficulty when you tried to do that? So what we're going to, this is an opportunity to get feedback from the whole group. So this is a chance to improve your learning goals. So I'm encouraging you to volunteer, but just share it with us what the course is, what the learning goal you were trying to write was, and then maybe what your first effort came out as. And then we'll play with it and see if we can find a way to enhance it. So anybody wants to volunteer for that?
Steve, before we start that, I think
Okay.
Quinn has a question.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Okay, my question was in regard to the low, medium, high quality. It looked like you could also read that as very broad, getting a little bit more specific and quite specific. So I think even as I was writing mine, that was something I was trying to determine, like how broad versus how specific, and it seemed almost to err on the side of specific. Would that be a different way to say it partially?
Well, yeah, that is a really good way to describe that. And that also is one of the principles that was in that handout that I was telling you about. And you're right. That's number one is problematic, but because it's too broad. Because and what I mean by too broad is when I use a verb, and this is where you really need to pay a lot of attention to your verb. Is it at the right level? Too broad, too specific? And to me, learn the basic theories is too broad, because what do you mean by learn? Let's see if we can't focus that a little bit more, one step down. And the problem with the number 3 is communicate. Now, communicate is a good term, but the grammatically correct sentence I thought was too specific. I mean, you want to work on that, but that's not one of the big goals here. You might want to unpack communicate to whether you mean all 4 of the basic communication things, or mainly understanding and speaking. And to me, number 2 hit it about right in the middle. Describe multiple factors that explain historical event. I get a handle on that. It's focused. It's not. I don't get too many things other than supporting evidence into the criteria, but that's an important one. So I went ahead and put it in there that you really want to pay attention to that evidence component of this. So yeah, you're right. How broad and how specific. And it's finding the right level that can guide the students. Some of the stuff we're going to say in the learning goal, students may not know, like supporting evidence, but we're going to unpack that later in the course, and we'll help you understand what constitutes good supporting evidence. So we'll get to that later, but we want you to know that that's going to be important and so forth. So yeah, that's a good observation. That's a good way to describe one of the key components of good versus poor learning goals, getting that right level of breadth versus specificity.
I agree.
Key thing is to think about the students. You want to describe it in a way that communicates to them what you really want them to learn to do. You were going to say something, Jay?
I was just going to add that part of it is a lot of folks, and myself included, have a hard time revising learning outcomes without thinking of how I'm going to measure it and what I'm going to have to do in order to ascertain whether they've demonstrated it or not. And I think it's a tough position to be in, because when you get to that level of specificity, the question is, well, how will I know that that's there? And so I'm a big fan of analytical rubrics, but there is a point when you're, staring too closely at your navel, and then it becomes very difficult both to assess and to write that outcome. So I agree with what you're saying, Quinn. I think part of it is at what level is it too specific? And if you go in thinking that this particular outcome may be too specific, you can certainly get more general. I think going from general to specific is a little bit more difficult unless you've got like a specific competency that you want to have them demonstrate. And in that case, then it may be easier. But typically I try specific going out to general rather than the opposite way.
Yeah. I'm so glad you raised that question. I want to take that concern that teachers often have about, I'd like to write this learning goal, but I'm not sure I know how to evaluate it. And so therefore I don't know what to do with it, to a different issue. And that is on the left-hand side, especially, but especially for things like caring and human dimension, people often get stumped when they're trying to write learning goals in those two categories, especially, particularly, but especially caring, when they say, well, I have no idea how I would evaluate that. And my advice for you at this point, where we're just writing learning goals, is set that concern aside for the moment. You do need to come back to it, but we will do it when we get to the assessment part of writing the 3-column table. And we have some ideas on that. But for the moment, whether or not to write a learning goal in the category of caring or human dimension, especially human dimension. So just ask yourself, is that something I really want to promote in this course? And if it is, go ahead and write the learning goal. We'll worry about the assessment part later. That isn't important, but separate that from just, do you want to write the learning goal and how to write it? The other thing that I think goes along with what Jay was just saying is, give these learning goals, you want to get them on there, give them your best shot, but realize, teach the course with the ones you have, and then look at the reaction of the students to their learning goals. Did they look like they understood them? Did they need them to be more specific? Was it too specific? Did it make it a little broader, or which way is it? And then revise them second time or even the third time. You always have a chance to play with them. That's what you want to do at some point, is get feedback or read the reaction of the students. But they don't have to be perfect first time around. Try to learn maybe from that handout from the Air Force Academy, help you write as good as you can. But so write them as good as you can, but then look for feedback from the students, just the reactions. They seem to be getting what I wanted to do, or they need to rephrase it, restate it in a way that would be clearer. So, okay, good question. Any other questions on this before we go to the other side task we were going to go on here? Any other questions?
Just briefly, I will upload that handout right now. Just give me one moment and it'll be in the handouts section that I emailed everybody about earlier.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's go on to this task here then. Again, is there anybody who tried to write a learning goal on the left-hand side of the taxonomy that you'd like some help with, that you weren't real satisfied with the way it came out? Good chance for feedback here. And a chance for everybody to see how we take a first draft and improve on it.
I'll tell you what I did to try to get the caring part in. This is Paul Egland. I'll paste my goal into the comments so everybody can see it. But let's see here. I tried to increase the caring and the interest by including what steps can be taken. At the end of this goal, this is about antibiotic resistance and how it works and like the biology behind it. This is for a microbiology course. And in order to get people to care, I tried to include steps that could be taken to prevent the spread of antibiotic resistance. So the students have to think about what they could do personally. Yeah.
Now that sounds like a learning activity or an assignment here. What is your learning goal? By the end of the course, you want students that is an indicator of caring. My students will what? What's the verb here? I want them to get excited about, be curious about.
Implement, maybe implement, or I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Okay, let's see. What I'm hearing, here's what I'm hearing in your statement. Tell me if this is accurate.
Yeah.
That you want them to attach importance to, well, either antibiotic issues or just microbiology in general. I don't know if it's a general elective course or a majors course.
It's a majors course.
The majors course. So, you presume they're already somewhat interested in microbiology, so you don't have to worry about that so much. What is it you want them to become more interested in, more caring about?
More caring about how they personally are going to prevent the spread of antibiotics among themselves and among people they interact with, whether they're healthcare professionals or parents or,
Okay. See, and these are the kind of questions you have to push yourself with and ask yourself, what is it I really want here?
Yeah. So maybe I have too much in there because I have the first part is the biology of it. I mean, even like down to the molecular biology of it. And then at the end, I think maybe this should be two separate goals.
Yes, I think part of what you had in there belongs in some of the other categories of either foundational knowledge
for sure.
or application here.
Yeah.
But for this one,
most of it's on the right side of the circle.
Yeah. So let's see if we can pull something out that really belongs over here under caring, because that will also help the others.
What about just putting the word practice in by steps? I think it's a worthy goal. Describe several mechanisms of antibiotic resistance factors leading to the development and spread of antibiotic resistance, and practice steps that can be taken to reduce resistance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kicker is going to be about, yes, we're setting aside the implementation and the assessment.
Hold that aside for the moment.
Yep, yeah. So would you say that again? That was practice? Is that the key word here?
Yep, practice right before the word steps, and practice steps that
can
reduce resistance.
Thanks.
Okay. Now, while she was offering that, and that's good, I was playing with another one here, and by the end of the course, students will value their own personal role in preventing the spread of infections.
That's good. Value their own personal
They will value that's what I'm hearing you say. They will value their personal role or their own personal role in preventing it. So if they value it, then they're ready to say, well, what do I need to know? Foundational knowledge. Well, how do I practice it? Application, so forth, and some other things. What you're saying, I just want them to value that their role in preventing this is important, knowing because that can help change their own behavior, but also communicate with others. We're already moving down in the human dimension there.
Yeah, I like it.
In educating others. So just value their role in preventing.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, good. Let's take one more on a different category if we can. Anybody? Be brave. Be brave.
This is Sarah Root. I can give you a human dimension one.
Okay, good. What's the course?
This is English 200, which is, it can be just about anything, but this semester it's going to be literature of epidemics.
You mean about academics or by academics?
Epidemics.
Oh, epidemics. Okay.
And I put it in the chat.
Okay. And were you focusing on specifically within human dimensioning on learning about themselves or interacting with others and realizing those are linked, but were you working on one or the other?
I think this sort of captures both of them.
Okay. So what was your first trial statement here?
It's in the chat. Students will think deeply about how widespread illness affects people in different ways and compare it to their own experience of the pandemic and build empathy for people experiencing an epidemic. It's a little wordy now if I say it out loud.
Okay, so I got the think deeply part, and then like say you had two parts there, one part really kind of on the self, one on the others. Give me the first part about the self again. Just let me get the verbiage down.
Sure. Students will think deeply about how widespread illness affects people in different ways and compare it to their own experience of the pandemic with the intention of building empathy.
That's pretty much on, yeah, I would see if I could find a way to make it a little more succinct, but I think you're on target with it. Your key verbs are, your key verb is think deeply, okay? And I could go along with that. And then you've got part, basically how epidemics affect others and compare that with their own experience. In other words, others and self. So I think you're on track here. I think your verb is okay. I think that's the right focus for a human dimension. I just would, I'm not seeing the chat here because I've got my screen up here. But so that's why I'm listening, fishing for the words here. But I think you're on track here. So I think I might try to get it a little more succinct, or just a little more economical in the words. But maybe the way you got it is okay if I saw it laid out for a syllabus. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
So good job though. And that's interesting, by the way, just to decide that sounds like an interesting course for people to take in these days, in these times here.
Yeah, I was hoping it was going to be in the recent past when I proposed the class.
And you've probably got some chance to look at historical examples as well as current ones, of course, but that sounds like it would be a fun course here, an interesting course to take here.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you for offering that example up. All right, now we're going to move to the next section here. Once we get a set of good learning outcomes stated for our course, then we want to go to the next activity, which is to take those, put them into the left-hand column of that 3-column table, and then work our way across each learning goal separately. And I think I may have mentioned last week, but it's the reason it's really important that you work each row separately. That is, you find assessment activities and learning activities for your first learning outcome, and then go down to the second one. What are the assessment learning activities for the second one? You don't put learning activities for the course in there, is because you will quickly discover, if you think about it properly, you will need separate activities for different kinds of learning. Okay. And so here I'm taking the 3-column table, building it up, and you have your learning goals, whatever your specific ones in there are, and you work them across individually. And then you will start to discover what I was just saying that might look something like this. Now, the possible assessment activities, and we're going to take that one first. You can do either one first. You don't have to do assessment. In my mind, there's a moderate advantage, not overwhelming, but a moderate advantage in doing your assessment first. Because when you say, what would students have to do to show me that they really learned that, sometimes that clarifies what you're really trying to get at with that learning outcome. And you may need to rephrase the statement of learning outcome somewhat. But if you get where you've got a clear statement of the learning outcome and a good assessment activity, usually that makes it a lot easier then to look over to that 3rd column that we'll get to in a bit and say, okay, if that's what we're aiming at, what would they have to do to get us there, get them there? But for starters, let's take that. For example, different kinds of learning assessment activities. Multiple choice question, multiple choice test. Just fine. I mean, a lot of people are down on multiple choice tests, and I understand why, but that is just fine for foundational knowledge. Now, there's other ways you can get at that, but that's a pretty decent way to get at foundational knowledge. But when you move down to application, if you're a big student of Benjamin Bloom, he can show you some good ways to write application questions on assessment activities in multiple choice form, but also giving students a case studies. Here's a situation, what would be a good response to that kind of thing. You get down to integration. Basically, you're wanting students to write an essay in which they describe the interactions between factor X, Y, and Z, or whatever the 2 or 3 or 4 things are. But write an essay where they show they can understand the interactions between multiple factors here. You move down to the human dimension. One of the things you may want them to do is write reflective essays. Okay, here's my own honest thoughts about myself, my others, some of the things you were talking here in that human dimension in the literature course just a moment ago. You move into caring. How in the world do we assess caring? Okay. You might want them to do journals or something like that, or state preferences. Some people have been fairly creative and say, if you're faced with a choice of X, Y, or Z, which would you give priority to? And that will help the students and you see how high they have put a value on a particular thing vis-a-vis something else that's also good. Learning how to learn, they can build something into a learning portfolio. Another up for the assessment activity. How well can they learn, how well do they know how to keep learning on their own? Now, again, I said last week, and I'll repeat it here, I'm gonna, next week when we get to the putting it all together, I'm gonna show you an activity that I called a string of activities that was focused on both helping students at the learning activity, helping them learn how to learn on their own, but also gave me a product that I could look at and evaluate and say, how well can they learn? Do they look like they're ready to learn in the future on their own? So the string, I call it the string of activities. We'll look at that, but I had it linked to putting it into a learning portfolio. So that's just a sample of some of the different ways that you can assess these different kinds of learning. Again, that each of those boxes would be bigger. There's multiple possibilities. And that book by Barkley and Moore and Major have lots of different example assessment activities for each one of these categories. Now, one of the, yeah, question. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Go ahead and unmute.
Sorry, me?
Yes.
I was just wondering how to raise my hand, but I was going to save my actual question until he was done speaking, because it was about the connection between the 3 columns. So I'm going to shut up for now.
You want to go back to it right here? Is that what your question was about?
Well, I think it was what was coming, because I was having trouble distinguishing what would actually go in the 2 rightmost columns.
Ah, you mean something might be in the right-hand column as well as the left-hand column?
In the middle,
maybe, yeah.
in the middle
Yeah.
and the right. Like
Yeah.
I
mean, yeah, the right and the middle, yeah.
I would
Good
think
point.
that for case studies, like
Yes.
I teach ethics, I would think that
Well,
I would.
an excellent point, and I'm so glad you raised that, because you're absolutely true. Not always, but in several of these, and specifically where you mentioned application and integration and learning how to learn, those 3 especially. I often get people saying, hey, I have an activity here, but I'm not sure if this is a learning activity or an assessment activity. And I say, bingo, you've got it. It can be in both. And you're absolutely right. For application, you want them to do case studies in order to learn how to apply this knowledge. So that's the learning activity. And the assessment activity is basically just another case study that they haven't done before, maybe a little more challenging, but you say, I'm going to grade this one. Okay.
So the idea is just to, like, if they're applying a theory, they learn how to transfer knowledge. So you model the case study and then they do the case study.
Well, you model, but also more importantly, I would say you want to maybe begin by modeling just to show them, but then the next step would be for them to have multiple opportunities to practice applying it and get feedback, maybe from other students, maybe from you, whatever. And then at some point after they practiced it 2 or 3 or 4 times, you say, I think you've got the hang of it. Let's do it one more time. I'm going to grade this one, put it in the grade book, and we'll do something else. So
can I ask another question about the caring?
Sure.
Because I teach philosophy, I teach ethics, I teach religion, like theology, and I guess I'm afraid if these learning outcomes are being printed on a syllabus, then I'm gonna like show my hand, because there's a lot in ethics, especially. There's a lot of things that I want my students to care about. We're going to be talking about racism, and like, you know, I want my students to care about Black lives and a lot of other things. But I think that if that doesn't seem like an appropriate learning outcome or anything I can think of that I want them to care about. Doesn't seem like an appropriate learning outcome, at least for them to be aware of.
I'm so glad you raised that question, because there's a couple really important points to make about that one, and maybe a little bit on the human dimension self. Let me make them in sequence here. First of all, when you build your grading system, and this has to be very clear to students, you're going to include most of these, but not all of them, in the grading part of the course.
Okay.
The one that you cannot put in the grading, as you suspected, is the caring. Okay, because if you say I just taught world geography or just geography, and if I put in there, my goal was I want students to get excited about geography, and that's part of the grading system. Guess what I'm going to find? Every student in that class is going to be very excited about geography. Give me 10 points, prof. So you don't want that, because I mean, you want honest responses to something. And so what you've got to do is say, you know, I want you to maybe do some things that are just doing it. I want you to write about your thoughts and journaling from which I will look at and see if that indicates they're caring more or not. But it does not go into the grading scheme. They can go through this course and hate geography and still get an A.
In terms of stating the learning outcomes, would you not put it on the syllabus?
No,
because
you
then they
absolutely
think,
no.
I gotta be excited to pass the class.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say one of my goals is we're going to be doing things in this course in a certain way, because one of my goals is to encourage, help get you excited about geography. But that's not a requirement for this course. I just be aware I'm doing things to help do that. And so I think you want to be very transparent. I think you want to put your goals, all of them, in the syllabus. But you're also going to put, here are the criteria for the grading, and whether or not you care about geography or whether you care about Black Lives Matter is not one of them. You just they got to know that this does matter. This is going to be in the grading system. This isn't. You got to know some things. You got to be able to do some things, but you don't have to care. But I am still going to do some things to try to get you to care, and you've got to know why I'm doing certain things. But they're going to be in there for that reason. And the other one that's somewhat like that is human dimension self. You want them to be reflective and introspective about certain things. They're learning the course and what that's doing to them and the impact on it, so forth. But you want those to be very honest, not giving you what they think you want to hear. And so again, for that one, you don't want to put it in the grading system. Now, human dimension, interacting with others, you can, because you may want them to learn how to interact with others in a team. I do that, and so I use a lot of team activities, and that's graded. So they get feedback on how well they're performing as part of a team, and I think that's important. So I put it in the grading system. But the self, I don't. I want them to do the journaling, and that counts just if they did it as done or not done. So if they do it, they get it, the credit, even if they say, I'm writing this and I really hate writing this or really hate, whatever. But they got to write something to get the credit for it. So that's just to get them to do it. So that's part of it. Now, the other part of what I think is important about the question you raised is for things, especially philosophy, but even really for some of the other caring things. I think you still want to put things in there about for caring, but you may, for the learning goal, your goal may not want to be stated as, even if that's your subtext, but you don't want to say it, I want you to come to value Black lives as much, and as well as other ethnic groups or whatever. You may say, I want to think through carefully your own values about the worth of all human beings, or something like that, or all ethnic groups, or all disadvantaged groups, or all minority groups, or however you word it. I want you to think deeply or rethink your values, or examine your values, maybe examine your values, something like that. Regardless of how you come out, I want you to examine them consciously and carefully, and maybe with in an informed way, that kind of thing. And that's legitimate. I mean, and that's basically what you're trying to do is walk the balance between saying, I think you need to examine these issues, without saying, and you got to come out on this side of the issue. Because that's then preaching and political interference or whatever. But you can say, I want you to examine your values. That's legitimate, especially, I mean, that's what philosophy is all about in some sense. But so that's an appropriate level of generality, I guess, is what you're looking for there. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Good. And thanks again for raising it. That's important for everybody to realize that problem you might run into on carrying and how to deal with it. So, okay. Well, what I'd like you to do now, I want to look at the assessment thing here. And I came up with, in the book, with this concept of forward-looking assessment in contrast to backward-looking assessment. And here's the thinking behind that. I wish I had a little picture here, but all of you can imagine this. If you're going through a course and you've been going through about a 4-week segment here, and you want to do an exam, one thing you can do is turn around and look backwards during the past 4 weeks and say, we've talked about topics 1, 2, and 3. Here's an exam for you to show me all that you've learned about topics 1, 2, and 3. You can do that. But to me, that's backward-looking exam. And sometimes you want to do that. There's value in doing that. But more importantly, I think, is to, at that point, at the end of the 4 weeks, turn around and look the other way to the end of the course or beyond the course and say, if you did learn something about topics 1, 2, and 3, what can you do with it that might have value in your life to be able to do something with it? That's looking forward to life, authentic life situation where you might be able to use it and do it. And so I'm going to give you an example here of a course. This was a colleague of mine that did this. And I'm going to show you 2 ways of assessment in this music appreciation course and ask you which one you thought was the better or the more forward-looking. Course music appreciation, what you've been doing is reading some things, the text, attending the lectures where he talks about music and listening to recordings of music, a very common activity in that kind of course. Here's one assessment option. The teacher at the end of a period, at a certain time of the course, they have to go to attend an orchestra concert. The teacher shows him a program for that concert that they're going to attend, and then asks him this kind of question. For the first piece in the program, how many musicians do you think will be on the stage? And to answer that, they're going to have to, what period of time, what kind of music was it? Was that when they had an 80-piece orchestra or a 16-piece group here to come out there? Just what kind of piece are we going to look at here? And questions like that, and anticipatory questions. Then afterwards, they write a reflection journal about their reaction to attending the concert. One assessment option. Another assessment option, B, is to take a multiple choice exam on the foundational knowledge presented from the lectures and the text. Now, which one of these is forward-looking? A or B? Just shout out. A or B? Which one's forward-looking?
A.
A.
A, yeah. That's looking past the course, and actually this concert, but really this concert that they're going to attend as a model for future concerts that they might attend, and prompt them to say, well, here's some questions you might ask once you find the program, to say, what do you expect to attend, and is that what happened, and why did it or didn't, and so forth, kind of thing, versus this, which is a backward-looking situation. We studied these, so here's some information presented. Do you understand it? Sometimes you want to do some of that, but a bigger, more valuable one is this one, kind of forward-looking. Okay. Now what I'd like for you to do is go into your small groups and when you tried your 3-column table during this past week, pick one of your assessment activities that was difficult for you to identify. You just had a hard time coming up with an activity that you thought was a good assessment activity for one of the kinds of learning, and share that with your group, and then let the rest of the group say, can you brainstorm, like I've been doing a little bit here, brainstorm ideas for a good or a better activity for that kind of learning. And then what we're going to do, let's give you about 10 minutes on that. And then I'm going to ask you to come back and share some of those, what the examples were that you had, and what were some of the ideas that you came up with for trying to improve that. And we'll try to use those as a way of educating all of us. So go in, so there's the question, I'll leave that up there. Take about 10 minutes.
I'm going to click the magic button to put you in your breakout rooms. Why don't we do the last person to enter the room is the representative when we come back. And I'll hit that button now. And then if there's anybody manually that we have to push over, I will do that.
maybe I should stop sharing my screen so everybody can have a full screen again. Would that be a good thing? Then come back to it later?
I think that's good, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And Jay, I might ask you just to pick a group to volunteer for the first example here, if you have one, or if we have a group that wants to volunteer. Is everybody back in now?
Yep,
Okay.
we've got everybody. Would anybody like to volunteer?
Is a group that had one that they felt was a real problem, but they made some good progress on it, they'd like to share with us?
Well, we had a real problem, but I don't know how much progress we made on it. But
well, let's take a look at it. Sounds good.
So
tell us the course and the kind of learning they were working on.
This is a first year seminar. So the main purpose of the course is one of the main purposes is to help them become better writers. So the learning goal then is that they understand and incorporate the process of writing. So to make mistakes, to rewrite, to get distance from the writing, etc.
Yeah.
The assessment would be a writing portfolio, but so that I can make sure that they're actually incorporating all of the steps of the writing process. But beyond just making a check and saying, yes, you've incorporated all of the steps in the writing process, I'm not sure how to really assess that in a smart way.
Yeah. What were some of the ideas? Was that the first, I just have a writing portfolio, or was that one of the suggestions that came up?
Well, we talked about that. I thought that having a writing portfolio would be a good assessment for it.
Okay.
But yeah, we really didn't get very far in figuring out a good way to assess it.
Okay. All right. Does the group have ideas about how to improve this? Your goal is for them to both write better. I'd say there's probably two parts of that, but better understand the writing process. But the part of them, you want them to write better, but you want them to be self-conscious about the process they need to go through to write better. Yes. And to use that process. So if that's the goal, if that's the purpose, how would you know if they had in fact improved their ability to write and understand that the process they need to go through to write well? Ideas?
Couldn't you assess the various parts? Is my volume weird?
I can hear you well.
It's fine.
Yeah, so like if step, I don't know, 3 is writing a thesis statement, couldn't you actually assess how well they wrote the thesis statement before they moved on to writing the body paragraphs or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you do that already?
I do that, yeah. It's sort of like a separate chunk of the course, but it makes sense to view it as incorporated into this.
Additional ideas?
Danny, I brought up almost the exact same thing in our breakout group as well, because I struggle with that assessment piece. And what I get feedback from students is the best assessment piece, or what they like the most, are the one-on-one conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And I do both a pre and a post. So during the writing process and then post, so they can see the difference between the two. But
yeah, so maybe it's not a quantitative assessment, but a qualitative one where you go through and talk about what's in their portfolio and how it led to the final product.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Additional thoughts from anybody?
Could you repeat the core issue again, Danny?
Yeah, well, the outcome is to understand and incorporate the writing process.
I think what I heard of the issue, maybe in response to Michael's question there, your issue is you had the idea of a writing portfolio, and students would put examples of writing into it, maybe sort of a summative assessment at the end of the course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, as opposed to just archiving examples of it, is there anything more what one ought to do, was the question.
Yeah.
If that's the issue, Michael, do you have any thoughts about what might be ways to do that? how to do more than just archive examples of writing.
Well, I guess I'm having difficulty without having more specifics, because Lee's suggestion, I think, is really good. It's an element of it, and so I mean, I haven't taught FYS yet, and I look forward to it in terms of the developing of writing someday. I have taught our Spanish 320 and 321 course many times, and those always incorporate, because they're W component courses, and they always incorporate elements that have to do with improving the writing. And I don't think that we've been able, or at least in my iterations of the course, I haven't really been able to do fully what Danny is looking at here either. But I think that in a dream setting, because we've talked at the beginning with this, you know, if in your book and in our discussions about starting with that, the dream of the ideal, it would very much be about piece by piece, all throughout the duration of the semester, developing that piece of writing. And I suppose it would be a constant, you know, if there's a way of doing that portfolio that is, apart from archiving their writing, always getting them to also maybe do a component where they're constantly reflecting on what they're submitting into that portfolio. And I guess maybe instead of writing about it, but reflecting on it, even like a video recording where they look at this piece compared to this piece, or how this piece is now a better draft of this piece, and they're actually, you know, engaging with that contemplation actively as opposed to just archiving it.
I like that a lot, Michael. And one thing that I thought about doing was to have them turn in their final essay, but have the final essay annotated, and so that they reflect on different rhetorical choices that they use. But as part of that, the annotation project, they could also annotate on how incorporating the process helped write a better essay too.
I think that one of the problems that we have is that it's very difficult. We have a pace of life, and this pace of life is infiltrated into academia, and the rush through getting, you know, graduating on time and getting to the end of the semester with all the material and content that we need, that we really don't afford much time to that very fundamentally human part of experience, which is contemplation and simply just thinking about, with pause, all the things that we're going through. And I, you know, that's not something that you can easily assess, but it's of tremendous value. And this is my big concern with all of this stuff. So I'm gonna just quickly on my assessment or anti-assessment soapbox, because I feel like we obsess about it so much that there are many things of great value that are difficult to assess, but I fear that our obsession with assessing things will lead us to easily eliminate the things that cannot be easily assessed. And so I think that your book is helpful for sure in focusing on the significant things that we want our students to get out of them. And I was encouraged by what you said earlier in response to Lee's question about, well, or simply about the idea of bracketing off the question about assessing when we're focusing on what we want to achieve in our class. But it's still a great concern that I have. There are a lot of important things that I think we need to be focusing our attention on, but we don't, because it's not part of that foundational knowledge, or we can't easily measure how well students deal with it.
Well, that was one of my big hopes for this both for the taxonomy, but also for the then addition of a big dream that then leads to making more specific things, is that would prompt / free people up to step back and say, what would be really valuable for students to learn in a course like this? And then the question becomes, if you could get a clear focus on that, then start saying, how can I get that to happen? But then come back to the assessment part. I think you, to partly repeat what I said earlier, to assess the things you can assess, and just maybe dialogue or provide your own feedback, or others people to dialogue and provide feedback with the students, with each other, about the other things that you can't quantify, or not even sure you want to quantify, but you might want to have a dialogue about, just as a way of deepening their thinking about things that are important, but you don't want to, either can't be or you don't want to quantify it. But it's nonetheless engage in activity, mental activity around it, maybe is a way to describe it. Okay, I am conscious, so thank you for your comments, Michael, and also for the example. I'm going to,
before you move on,
conscious of the time, we need to be wrapping up fairly quickly here, right?
yes, Sarah's got her hand up, so I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure I acknowledged her before we moved on.
I did not see it. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to ask, and I actually did a little chat with Danny now. I was just wondering if there was a formal reflection associated with the portfolio, but Michael also was asking about that, so we're good.
Okay, good deal. All right.
Well, and that was going to be a comment that I was going to make. I think it is really good. Well, maybe 3 real quick comments. One of the things we're going to talk about next week is trying to set your course or even components up in a sort of step-by-step where each step builds on what went before it, and each step that you do prepares people to do the next step fully or properly or well or whatever. And when you were talking about writing, and somebody mentioned the thesis statement, which would probably be an early part of it, would be a wonderful example of step 1. Then you do step 2, building paragraphs, or step 3, elaborating, and 4, getting in, introducing evidence or arguments or reasoning and so forth. That'd be a nice way to think of a sequence that you want to have for that. The second point was just what I guess Sarah here that said, I think a real important addition to a learning portfolio or a writing portfolio would be have them to put their examples in it, but at least as important, maybe more important for me, would have a reflective statement about the writing, what they learned from the process, what that left them feeling about the process of writing that you introduced as a way of improving the writing. But then within that or somewhere how that, for them to make some comparative observations themselves about how their first effort and then the process, did it really help them improve the quality of their writing? Can they see themselves by the end of the course as being able to write better? And if so, what's the evidence of that? Partly reflection, but reflection on the examples in the writing portfolio. So just a couple of good thoughts to add to that. But I think that I too would echo Sarah and say reflection would be a real important part of any portfolio, but including a writing portfolio. Okay, I need to wrap up. So let me go back and let's see, share my screen again. Let's jump down here to where we were. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're not going to, I was wanting to do some more examples like we did with this one, but we've run out of time here. But basically, with the learning activities, you want to do the same thing, carrying them across, look at different kinds of activities for different kinds of learning, work on refining that, thinking about it, how to make it really, is that activity sufficient and appropriate for that kind of knowledge? And will it get students to where I want them to be by the end of the course? Take them from where they start to where I'd like for them to be at the end of the course. So work on that. I think the assessment is more challenging, so I'm glad we did that first. The general idea is going to be the same thing with the learning activity. As you look at the learning activity, I can show you one example here of a high quality, low quality learning activity. And the example I've been giving here is a science course where you want students to connect what they're learning in the course with being able to think more fully about their everyday experiences or some of the topics in the news. So one activity to get that happen is to have students themselves bring in something from their everyday experience and then have the whole class or small groups, whichever, comment on how science, what they've learned so far in that course does or doesn't add to an understanding of that item. Versus where they read examples in the textbook that makes those connections. So you can see those connections that maybe the textbook makes, and maybe hear the teacher also comments from examples. But I kind of like this one where the students bring them in and make examples. It's more proactive, getting the students to get in the habit of doing the work of noting the experiences in their life or in the news, and themselves start building the bridges between that and what they have learned or are learning in their courses. So just a quick comment that that's the kind of thing I think we want to look for as much as we can, and that comes under the general rubric of active learning. But let me just wrap up and get you ready for next week. Next week, the final session of this, we're going to try to take what we've done so far, and I call it putting it all together, but basically taking the 2 activity columns from the 3-column table and putting it into your weekly schedule. And with a couple quick thoughts about that, all your activities have to be in that weekly schedule, all of them. There's all the assessment activities you identified and all the learning activities, because if they're not in there, if they're not in the course, you don't have the horses to pull the wagons you said you want to pull, i.e. the kind of learnings that you want to use. So that's part of it. But then again, second big point, it makes a lot of difference how you sequence those, what you put first, second, third, and a couple other things we'll take a look at next week. I am going to give you an assignment to work on between this week. Jay and them may want to have you read some pages from the book. But in addition, I'm going to send a handout called Building the Units in an online course. This is part of the steps toward this putting it all together. It's about a 4-page handout, so it's not elaborate, but it has some key points it tries to make. So read that, and then for your first part of applying that, I'm going to ask you to do these 2 things. First of all, start to identify the segments for your course, okay? That is, you chunk the course. If you got a 15, 16-week course, and it doesn't matter whether it's online or the face-to-face, you have segments in it, and try to identify what those are, but also get them so that this building that I was talking about, so that the first segment prepares them for the second segment, prepares them for the third segment, try to get that kind of sequence going. There's also some material in here that talks about labeling those segments. I picked this up at a workshop I went to about all of this at the University of Virginia some years ago that I was really excited about, and there's some ideas about that in that reading. It reminds me, I want to send an example of that. But one teacher had the idea of putting, for the labels of the segments, using questions rather than nouns. And when I looked at the syllabus that had questions for the labels of the 3, 4, 5, 6 segments of the course, they just pulled me into the course. I wanted to know the answers to those questions. And that was the purpose, what the teacher wanted to do with it. So it's not just, well, we're going to learn a lot of information about topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, but what is the answer to that question, and start building out information that allows students to answer those questions. So to the degree you can take a crack at that, if you find that intriguing, not a requirement, but a sort of strongly encouraged or recommended kind of idea, is change the way you label those segments. So if you can do that, we can come in with that, then we can spend a good part of our time next week looking at that, all the segments and so forth, and talking about how you sequence them and some of the other things about putting it all together. So that's it for me here. Look forward to seeing you next week and wrapping this up. So that's on my end. So Jay, anything else you want to do to wrap up today's session?
Oh, I just want to thank everybody. We went a couple minutes over. We'll post the video as quickly as we can, and I'll send out a summary probably slightly after lunchtime today is what I'm shooting for. So thank you all. We will stick around in case you've got any technical questions. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the lack of humidity here in Sioux Falls.